Perhaps every young girl dreams of becoming a princess. Beautiful, wealthy, and famous, living happily ever after, just like in a fairy tale. I wasn't an exception. I had a happy childhood and big ambitions throughout my youth and adulthood. I wanted to be famous. I became known, but not because of any exceptional talents, but because of the extraordinary cruelty of my killer. I was born in 1981 in Santa Clara, California, USA. I lived with my parents, my mother Teresa, and my father Kurt Johnson. As an infant, I moved with my parents from California to the small town of Saugatuck, Michigan. It was a quiet, peaceful town with a tranquil harbor and a population of less than 1,000 people. The town was cozy and beautiful. It seemed like the safest place I could find to build a happy future. The crime rate was exceedingly low. The locals didn't lock the doors of their homes, not even fearing any intruders. The community was based on the fact that everyone knew each other. I had a brother, Derek, only a few years older. Our family seemed friendly and happy. However, the family idyll was disrupted when the Johnsons decided to separate. They remained on good terms for the sake of the children. I and my brother lived alternately with our father and mother, as required by the care plan. Because of this situation, I quickly became involved in the household. I began helping my mother from the age of 12, including assisting with the family budget. I tried to get a job so I could be independent and not have to ask my parents for money. Later, my older brother joined the army, after which he decided to become a professional military man. At this time, I was in high school. Becoming independent, I completely took my life into my own hands. I was helped by my intelligence, as well as my natural beauty. At the same time, I was very cheerful, upbeat, and an interesting conversationalist. I looked great, also due to my active and healthy lifestyle. My relatives admired my beauty and advised me to conquer Hollywood. I most enjoyed sailing, surfing, and everything related to water. I practiced these sports when I went to California to visit my grandmother. However, I always missed my favorite hobbies when I returned to Michigan, and it took some time for me to readjust. Here, I was fond of theater, being a member of a small acting club. In the winter, I worked as a waitress in a local cafe. I became a real asset for the owner of the establishment, as I was very kind, polite, and sociable, which attracted more visitors. At this time, I increasingly had thoughts of leaving our tiny town of Saugatuck. The quiet atmosphere of the province wasn't for me. I thought I deserved more and wanted a different life than serving food in cafes. I thought there were no great prospects for me in this city. In 1999, I graduated from high school, finally having enough freedom to start building my life and the road to success. Having reflected on my situation, I decided to go in search of myself. I traveled to different cities, worked there, and tried myself in different spheres of activity. In the end, I decided to settle in California in 2000, which I loved so much. It had a beautiful climate and many more opportunities to realize my potential. At first, I moved to live with my grandmother in a small resort town of Santa Maria with a population of 100,000 people. But despite the proximity of all my favorite pastimes, I took care of the important matters first. The first thing I did was to look for a job to support myself. It was very important to me. I got a job as a system administrator in the city's electric power company. Then I began to deal with the issue of my education. I decided to enroll at the University of California. The school was quite far away, 40 minutes from my grandmother's house. I enrolled there and bought a car with the money I had earned earlier. But even by car, it was a problem to travel so far. It took me a lot of time, so I started to look for a job closer. That's how I first touched my dream, Hollywood. I managed to get a part-time job with a film crew that was planning to make a movie. My experience performing in a theater club allowed me to fit into the new working environment. As a result, I was hired as an assistant on the set of a thriller. Here, I met people who live in Hollywood. It was a real star hour for a girl from the province. I socialized with world-famous actors and directors and was incredibly happy. I just couldn't believe that I was socializing with celebrities. I was literally consumed by the world of movies. This work inspired me so much that I wanted to be closer to this field of work. I enrolled in professional makeup courses where I was taught by Hollywood makeup artists. Having mastered these skills, I thought of becoming a makeup artist on a movie set. To do so, I was going to travel to the dream city of Los Angeles. Although it was quite a risky journey, curiosity was stronger than fear of the unknown. I was drawn to Hollywood, and as a result, I moved to Los Angeles, where there are several famous movie studios. It was a real period of temptation for the young beauty, but I demonstrated the best rules of decency, which only a young girl is capable of. I didn't lead a rambunctious lifestyle, despite the popular trends in the community in which I found myself. I avoided hangouts and parties. I was modest enough. I had a boyfriend I had met a couple of years ago and kept in touch with despite the distance. Then he moved in with me. We decided to rent an apartment together in Los Angeles since 2002. We weren't yet financially stable, so it was beneficial for both of us. It wasn't an easy adventure, but I didn't despair and began to look for a new job for permanent employment. However, it wasn't easy. I only found various part-time jobs. There was no serious work, and most of our budget was earned by my boyfriend. Meanwhile, relations in the couple of me and Todd were getting worse and worse. I later complained to my mother that verbal altercations with my boyfriend were increasingly ending in physical violence. I was trapped in a toxic relationship that was financially strained. My mother began looking for a new place for me to move out. I ran away from my boyfriend, settling into a small apartment. I continued to study remotely. At this time, my father was supporting me well financially. He hoped that I would finally find my place and vocation in life, so he wanted to help me. By November 2002, I finally got a job at a cell phone company. But the place was far from my ideals. Neither the field of activity nor the income met my expectations. Besides, I couldn't find a normal place to live close to work. My mother had located a comfortable home in the nearby town of Santa Monica, outside of Los Angeles, which was to be shared with two other women. However, it was close to the beach and situated in a bustling bedroom community. It was the perfect setting for him to get back on his feet, and so I relocated there. During this period, I transferred to the University of Santa Monica. My dreams of Hollywood did not materialize. I was unable to initiate a career, and my relationship dissolved. I effectively restarted my life from scratch. Despite this, I did not succumb to despair and persevered towards my aspirations. On February 15, 2003, I was planning to attend a party. Prior to this, the young beauty went to the shopping center. I engaged in an extensive conversation with my mother via phone, discussing future plans. This was the final communication with my loved ones. The following day, Sunday, February 16, 2003, my mother expected a call to hear about the events of the previous day. However, I did not make contact. She attempted to reach me, but the phone was unavailable. Initially, this did not raise major concerns, as I could have been resting or at work and unable to answer the call. However, the next day, there was still no communication. At approximately 9 a.m., my mother contacted me at work. I was usually available and responsive, but this time the answering machine picked up. My mother then reached out to my manager, who responded that I had not reported for work. He also emphasized that I was a reliable employee and had demonstrated no tardiness or absenteeism in the previous 3 months, so my absence was unexpected. However, they were unable to contact me either. According to the manager, I was last seen on February 14th. One of my colleagues at work mentioned that I was scheduled to attend a party. My mother reviewed my social media page, but found no useful information about the event. I never posted any photos from the party, despite my previous habit of actively maintaining the page, documenting every aspect of my life. She also examined my bank accounts, but there had been no transactions since I stopped communicating. My mother contacted all the hospitals, but I was not registered anywhere. Then, on February 17th, my mother decided to contact the Santa Monica Police Department and reported my disappearance. Investigators checked for any involvement in traffic accidents during those days, but nothing was found. My neighbor also had not heard from me since my disappearance. The police turned to my ex-boyfriend, Todd, with whom I had a tumultuous and sometimes violent relationship. The possibility of him having harmed me was considered, but he denied seeing me. My neighbors provided superficial information, stating they had seen me on Saturday, February 15th, heading to a party. However, they were unaware of my company or the exact location. This information was previously relayed to my mother by my colleagues. This was the initial lead in the case, and investigators started to verify the information. Later, a new detective was assigned to the case. Upon reviewing the collected records, the photo of the missing woman shocked him. The victim of the crime bore a striking resemblance to another missing woman who was found dead in 1995. That girl was an aspiring model who was invited to a photo shoot for a magazine called Photographer, but the shoot never took place. The victim's name was Linda Sobek, and her killer was photographer Charles Redband. He had lured the beautiful blonde to the countryside, where he raped and murdered her. However, the officer was aware that Linda's killer was already incarcerated and could not have been physically involved in this case. It was possible that a copycat of Charles had been inspired by his actions and replicated his scheme. Detectives needed to obtain at least something connected to me, so my car, a white Mazda Miata, was added to the wanted list. Simultaneously, while communicating with my mother, the investigators gathered more details about my ex-boyfriend, Todd, and also learned about my new boyfriend named Lucas. However, my mother knew very little about Lucas, not even his last name, which complicated the search. Over 48 hours had passed, a critical period for finding missing persons. The police seriously considered the possibility that I was no longer alive. They initiated a study of my cell phone's billing data. It was discovered that the last outgoing call from my phone was made at 5:34 p.m. on February 15th. I had contacted the 411 help desk, which could indicate I was in trouble or trying to verify an address or phone number. The conversation lasted about 3 minutes, which could have been a critical communication for the investigation, but the exact content was impossible to determine, as these calls were not recorded. Following that call, my cell phone went dead. Its last known location was in the Ventura Boulevard area. The police then contacted the media to involve them in the investigation. Headlines immediately reported my disappearance with hints of similarities to Linda's murder. Investigators searched my apartment for potential clues. They found a receipt from a lingerie store dated February 15th, the day I went missing. Police discovered that I continued to communicate with my ex-boyfriend despite his aggressive behavior. I would occasionally visit his house, with the last visit being on February 7th. But the initial significant clue detectives discovered was from the information from my email account. On February 13th, I had sent a message to the party organizer. In it, I mentioned I was looking forward to the event and intended to purchase a ticket. I was informed that all seats were sold out, but I was placed on a special waiting list. This is a common tactic when organizers of such events with celebrities aim to deceive visitors and offer VIP tickets at an inflated price. The police located my new boyfriend, Lucas, and spoke with him. He stated that he last saw me on February 14th, the day before my disappearance. They had spent the evening watching a movie together and then said goodbye. The guy successfully passed the polygraph test, had an alibi, and did not raise any suspicions with the investigators. Following this, detectives questioned my ex, Todd, but he also had an alibi. He was out of town, and several people confirmed this. From all the potential leads, the police were most interested in the party I had attended and never returned from. They believed that the key to solving my disappearance lay there. Investigators contacted the event organizers and were shocked. It turned out that I had not bought a ticket and did not attend the party. But then where could I have gone? To reconstruct the timeline of the events of that fateful evening, the police reviewed the transactions made with my bank card. With this, law enforcement officers recognized and checked all the stores I had been to that day. I was focused on reviewing CCTV footage, hoping to find something unusual or any leads. This process took a considerable amount of time. While my colleagues were sifting through the information, we received a concerning phone call. A woman named Susan Murphy reported a suspicious individual. She recounted a brief encounter with a man named Victor Thomas at a store. He had been impersonating a representative from a movie company, claiming to be casting for the new James Bond film. He had pressured her, inviting her to audition for the role of Bond girl, complimenting her appearance. She had considered participating in the casting, but she felt uneasy about him and managed to decline at the last moment. As a precaution, her husband, a former police officer, went to meet her. He had personally spoken to Victor, attempting to ascertain the man's intentions, but he had fled without providing any useful information. Susan, however, had investigated everything she knew about him, and it turned out he was lying. Victor Thomas had no connection to the movie. Such a person didn't even exist. It was likely that he had fabricated this information, much like Linda Sobek's murderer, in order to approach a beautiful woman, though for what purposes was unknown. Although Susan's encounter ended well, Victor was still at large and could potentially continue his deceptive activities. Therefore, this information needed to be verified, and Victor had to be located. He might have had malicious intentions. I checked all the stores where Christine had shopped on the day of her disappearance, reviewed the camera footage, but found nothing of significance. Then, I decided to visit the stores and speak with the staff. In conversation with the saleswomen, I provided a description of Victor, who was known to harass attractive women. At one of the outlets, a saleswoman stated that she had seen a similar man, but she couldn't provide any further valuable clues. An artist arrived on the scene to create a sketch of the suspect. The search for Christine intensified, with police dispatching dogs and volunteers to the area where she had last been in contact and calling the help desk. Patrols and volunteers were simultaneously searching for the vehicle and the missing person herself. The police received numerous reports of a similar car being spotted, but they all proved to be false. On February 24th, I finally received an important call. In a parking lot near the shopping center where Christine had been shopping, her car, a white Mazda Miata, was discovered. A forensic scientist arrived at the scene, conducted a thorough examination, collected fingerprints, and gathered all available evidence. Inside the vehicle, a water bottle was found in the back. They also found the missing woman's cell phone on the front seat. However, the real surprise awaited me when I spoke to the parking lot security guard. The man recalled a minor incident involving the car. The car had arrived at 5:45 p.m., but it had been reserved by another customer. A man exited the car and, upon learning this, reacted aggressively to the guard's warning. He simply threw the car keys at him and left without explanation. There was no one inside the car, and, unfortunately, there are no CCTV cameras in the parking lot to identify the driver. With no leads, I went back to analyze the girl's purchases that day and was astonished. On the day of her disappearance, Christine had purchased a set of clothes identical to those Susan had described. When Victor had invited her to the casting call, he had asked Susan to buy the shortest possible black miniskirt, a white shirt, stockings, and shoes. All these items were paid for using Christine's bank card. I didn't believe this was a coincidence, which meant she might have fallen victim to a fraudster whose intentions were unclear, almost as Susan had done, but she was accompanied by her husband. However, there was no information about Victor, and I didn't know how to reach him. I contacted the girls with whom the missing person had been living again. They remembered that Christine had indeed been going to some casting, but they couldn't recall the details. During our conversation, they remembered that it was definitely James Bond related. They said that Christine had been very excited before the event, and the description of the clothes she had left the house in, a shirt and miniskirt, matched the officer's concerns exactly. Christine had been worried about being late for the audition, which was scheduled for 5:30 p.m. She was wearing the revealing outfit that Susan and probably Christine had been asked to wear by the perpetrator. I kept going through the camera footage repeatedly to find Victor, and he was finally identified at the store where employees remembered him, but the quality of the footage was too poor to see facial features. However, it was already a clue, and I, with the help of witnesses, could reconstruct the alleged appearance of the perpetrator. By February 26th, a sketch of the main suspect in the disappearance of the young beauty was completed. One of the experienced detectives, who was familiar with the case materials, recognized him as Victor Paleologus, who had recently been released on parole, specifically on January 20th, 2003. He had previously been convicted of a sex offense. His violent criminal history included an incident where he had similarly lured a woman named Christine Kludgian into his apartment. He had invited her to a party where many celebrities would be in attendance. When she arrived, it was quiet and empty. He began harassing her, and when the woman resisted, he attacked her. The perpetrator used a rope, strangled her, and then intended to tie her up to rape her. However, the victim mustered her strength, broke free, ran out of the apartment, and was able to ask for help from neighbors. Victor Paleologos also used the bait of casting promises and party invitation for the victim. It was a standard scheme for him. Here, near the Walk of Stars, it worked like a charm. Many girls came to Los Angeles in pursuit of a Hollywood dream, and the perpetrators took advantage of it. The first time, the perpetrator got off with probation for assaulting a girl. Then there was the attempted rape of Kathy DiBuona in 1998, where he posed as Brian, a movie producer. He received a very light sentence for that attack. There's also every reason to believe that he had embezzled funds from the company where he had previously worked. In addition, there were many other victims of women he had tried to rape. However, he got away with all the police reports one way or another because the victims had no evidence. He once assaulted an ex-girlfriend when he broke into her home. This was also a botched sex crime, but the perpetrator took money and jewelry from the apartment. But even this crime he got away with, he got off with only a suspended sentence. Later, in a more serious episode, he trapped a girl named Heather. Like the others, he coaxed her to dress up in the manner that apparently excited him the most. He then tried to tie her up and rape her. The girl managed to break free. By some miracle, she pushed the perpetrator away with the sharp stiletto of her shoe. She had mere seconds to escape and get into her car. She then reported him to the authorities. Victor received a 2-year sentence for the offense, but he was released on parole on January 20th, 2003. This occurred just 3 weeks prior to Christine's disappearance. As it turned out, the perpetrator reverted to his old ways as soon as he was released. By the time the police began their search for him, he was already in custody. This time, he stole a BMW X5 from Beverly Hills and attempted to sell it using fabricated documents. Following his arrest for the carjacking, he was found to be in possession of a wallet containing a collection of stolen IDs, credit cards, and other documents. Victor Paleologos matched the profile of the criminal in Christine's disappearance case, and his actions mirrored the same pattern. Everything aligned, so the police decided to show his photo to Susan, who managed to avoid an attack thanks to her husband. At the police station, the girl immediately selected his photo from the lineup, and during the identification, she again singled him out, stating she instantly recognized Victor, even though he had clearly attempted to alter his appearance. The man hunched slightly, extended one arm longer than the other, and styled his hair differently, but the deception was uncovered. In a separate check, Susan's husband, who had tried to apprehend the perpetrator, also identified him. Unfortunately, the parking lot attendant where the missing woman's car was discovered could not identify the perpetrator, as he had only seen him briefly from a distance in the dark and couldn't make out his face. Although Victor was behind bars at the time, he had been free on the day of Christine's disappearance. During the interrogation, the criminal denied any involvement in Christine's disappearance and denied any contact with Susan, despite the overwhelming evidence to the contrary. Victor refused to speak to the detectives without a lawyer, citing his recent parole and his fear of being framed. Thus, the investigators began collecting evidence against him. Soon, a new witness came forward. This was a realtor who had been working with Victor for the past few weeks and found his behavior peculiar. The suspect was looking through him for a house valued up to $700,000. They had visited several properties each day. This continued until word arrived that the deeds and keys to one of these homes were missing. However, the realtor didn't suspect at the time that his client could be the thief. Now that he saw his picture in the police report, everything fell into place. The witness also identified the perpetrator. According to him, their last meeting was the day before Christine disappeared. On that day, Victor was acting strangely, appearing nervous. In one of the houses they viewed, he entered the toilet and shouted from it, supposedly to test the soundproofing. The police suggested that he might be using this method to select locations with good soundproofing for committing crimes. The police then examined each of the houses the intruder had visited. First and foremost, They focused on the house to which Victor had paid special attention. As it turned out, this house was located in the neighborhood where the missing woman's phone had last been pinged, which was also suspicious. The cops were looking for any traces, any evidence that might point to Christine, maybe her body in the house, but they found nothing. Meanwhile, his apartment was also being searched. On Victor's computer were found photos of women wearing his preferred attire: a miniskirt, white shirt, stockings, and stiletto heels. By this point, the investigation had been ongoing for 12 days, but the missing woman's family still hoped she would return home alive. Victor denied everything and did not share any information with the detectives. He only confirmed that he had seen Christine, but she had left, and he had never seen her again. Victor Paleologos was born in '62 in Pennsylvania. He came from an ordinary family. The man was the youngest of 5 brothers, attended college, and earned a bachelor's degree before moving to Los Angeles to attend graduate school. He was married from '90 to '93. Interestingly, there is reason to believe the criminal attempted to poison his wife in 1991 when she claimed him. His attempts to establish a restaurant business failed. He presented the image of a man with a grudge against the world who had turned to crime. His fetish for beautiful women likely caused him to cross a dangerous line, and he began attacking them with the intent to rape them. Regarding the evening when Christine disappeared, the perpetrator and his lawyer provided an alibi. Victor was meeting a friend at a restaurant. They had dinner. This information was indeed confirmed, but the police knew that he still had ample time to stage another drama with a new victim and abduct her. On March 1st, police received a call from a new witness. The man claimed he had seen the missing woman on February 15th. She allegedly stopped near his house and was looking for a mansion that looked like a castle. The man himself didn't know where it was, but his wife heard the conversation and told him where to go. This happened around 5:30 p.m. It's now clear the call was made to the number 411. The girl was trying to find her way to the castle-like house and call the information desk. The police had a new lead, a house that looked like a castle. This was the same house Victor had been soundproofing. Everything pointed to him. While the investigators were working with this information, a new event occurred. On March 3rd, 2003, 4 teenagers were walking in the Hollywood Hills. They were admiring the beautiful view of Los Angeles from above until one of them came to the edge and saw a strange object about 100 meters below. The teens started to look closely. They thought it resembled a mannequin. The boys began to descend, but still couldn't reach it. However, they were close enough to realize it wasn't a mannequin, but a human body. The young witnesses struggled to decide what to do for a long time because they hadn't brought their cell phones with them. They decided to head to the police, and on the way, they met a woman walking her dogs. The teens told her about the gruesome discovery. The woman was able to get closer to confirm it was true. The victim's legs were bound and wrapped in a blue cloth. She was wearing a gray hooded sweatshirt. Her hands were tied behind her back, and a hairband was left on her right wrist. Below the waist were torn stockings. The woman was frightened by what she saw and called the police. Soon, police and rescue workers arrived at the scene and, with great difficulty, were able to pull the body from the Hollywood Hills. The perpetrator probably hoped the body would never be found there. Perhaps it would have been so if not for the inquisitive teenagers who accidentally wandered into such a hard-to-reach area. The medical examiner was able to identify the body as the missing Christine Johnson. It was near the house that had looked so appealing during a viewing with a realtor that the victim was found. The police alerted Christine's parents of the tragedy, and they were beyond distraught with pain and loss. Numerous bruises and scratches were found all over the murdered woman's body, indicating her desperate resistance. The body's condition was poor. It had had time to decompose badly, having been in the heat for many days, and it had also rained for 1 day. The face was particularly difficult to recognize due to the numerous injuries, compounded by the downward tilt of the head. The girl's ear had been torn off, and she bore a significant bruise on her head and neck. These were the result of skull trauma and strangulation, which initially appeared to be the cause of death. However, further horrifying details later emerged. Detectives were convinced that Victor Paleologos was responsible for the murder. The challenge was to prove that Victor lacked a solid alibi for the time of the killing. The police sought to question his friend, Joey, with whom he allegedly had dinner that night. It turned out that Joey was not a close friend, but an acquaintance. Under detailed questioning, it also became clear that their supposed meeting was scheduled much later than the time of the encounter with Christine. According to the acquaintance, he had met Victor by chance the day before. On February 15th, Victor arrived late for their meeting, around midnight, even though they were supposed to meet much earlier. Victor had scratches on his face, which he attributed to an accidental injury while moving. Law enforcement officers then pieced together the sequence of events leading up to Christine Johnson's disappearance. The investigation revealed that he had picked up his victim at a shopping center, a place he frequented for his predatory activities. He spotted a beautiful young girl and decided to act. As was his pattern, he presented himself as someone in the movie industry and offered her an audition for the role of James Bond's girlfriend. He was very convincing in this endeavor. Victor employed his usual tactics, showering the girl with compliments and assuring her she was perfect for the role. Given the young beauty's ambition and youth, she believed the attacker and didn't refuse. The criminal arranged a meeting in a house he frequently visited with a realtor, claiming it was for a casting call. Christine, realizing she was walking into a trap, prepared for the audition by wearing the clothes requested by the perpetrator and arrived a little late, having gotten lost and contacted the help desk. She fell into a deadly trap from which she never escaped. She was assaulted at the meeting, but she fought back desperately, scratching his face. She had nowhere to run, and he was stronger. Victor overpowered her, raped her, and then murdered her to silence her. He first struck her on the head and strangled her, then dumped her body in the Hollywood Hills. The most tragic part was that the blunt head trauma and strangulation didn't kill her immediately. She only lost consciousness. When the killer tossed her onto the rocks, she fell from a considerable height, sustaining further injuries. That's when she regained consciousness. Christine died slowly and painfully at that location, never receiving help, and the victim passed away shortly after. On May 12, 2003, the district attorney indicted Victor. He faced charges of kidnapping, rape, and first-degree murder. However, the defense was fully prepared to protect their client's freedom because there was no direct evidence against him. The prosecution faced an uphill battle, so the forensic specialists utilized their strongest arguments. The defense contested the time of death, citing insects found on the body. However, all the similarities to the perpetrator's previous victims and attacks were brought to light. These cases were so strikingly similar that they had to be highlighted in court. Preparations for the trial were delayed, so Victor Paleologos didn't appear in court until July 2006. The defense emphasized that the prosecutor's office had virtually no physical evidence, no DNA, fingerprints, or CCTV footage linking Victor to the victim. This was attributed to the fact that the body was found 2 weeks after the disappearance, giving it time to decompose, thereby destroying potential evidence. However, when all the witnesses who accused Victor of harassment testified at the trial, the weight of the evidence shifted to the prosecution. They described how the man was a skilled manipulator. He was so convincing that even those who were skeptical, like Christine and Susan, initially believed him and agreed to participate in the casting, unaware of what awaited them. It seemed clear to everyone that this was his pattern and that the defendant had killed Christine, so the criminal played his trump card. To avoid the death penalty, he decided to negotiate with the prosecution and plead guilty to a lesser offense. It was then up to the victim's loved ones to accept the deal. The trial had already lasted 3 weeks with little progress and an uncertain outcome. After all the suffering, the victim's family was willing to make concessions to bring him to justice. On the day of sentencing, the defendant wrote an 11-page motion to the judge, requesting the withdrawal of his guilty plea. Fortunately, for everyone involved, this was not possible. Victor Paleologos was found guilty on all charges and sentenced to life imprisonment with the possibility of parole after 25 years.